Welcome back, guys. In this video, we're going to talk all about the premise of your story. What is a premise, and how can you successfully write one that's going to help you succeed with your novel? What's up, guys? Dave Jacobson here, best-selling author and book publisher. And in this fifth part of a series of videos, we're going to talk all about premise. We're going to talk about what it is and why you need it and why you need to think about it. And we're going to do it as part of this overall series where I'm teaching you from start to finish exactly how to draft a fictional novel. Okay? That sounds good, guys. I'm going to shrink my melon-sized head and we're going to get right in the heart of this video. So you can see here I pulled up the step-by-step story development process, which I developed over the years. This is the story. This is the step-by-step story process that I'm teaching in this, what will probably be a 20 or 25 part series. We've already gone through step 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 in the first 4 videos. So I encourage you to go back and watch those videos if you haven't already done so. But just to help you, if you're just joining us, I'm going to quickly recap the steps, and then we're going to move on to the next step, step 6, which is all about premise. You cannot write your premise well if you don't go through steps 1 through 5 first. There's an order and a method to the madness, guys. So I highly encourage you to do all of these steps in order, okay? So the first step for us was to come up with a working title. Yes, I know it sounds counterintuitive, but it's the most important text associated with your novel. I've written novels before, guys, and I've gotten to the end, and I've realized only after writing the entire novel that there wasn't a good title that I could come up with for that novel. And it was so infuriating that I realized that I always want to start with the title first. Not only because it's the most important text, it's going to determine whether people actually read your book or not, but also because it narrows the scope and helps you to figure out what you're actually writing about before you get going, okay? That's the number one cause of writer block. Having millions of ideas, not being able to narrow the scope into focusing your creative energies. So by starting with a working title, we do that right out of the gate. Step 2, we talked about loosely defining your protagonist and antagonist, right? So go back and watch that video if you're unclear about an antagonist and protagonist. But step 2 in this process is you need to define who they are and what are their competing high stakes goals. Okay? In storytelling, a protagonist is the main character, often the hero, whose journey and actions drive the narrative. Guys, if you don't know who your protagonist is, you cannot write the premise, right? So do this first, go back, watch those videos, or just follow along and then go back and do it after that, right? But for our purposes, we defined our antagonist and our protagonist during the second video in this series. And by the way, we're writing this book together, right? I'm doing this in front of you so you can see how successful this process works. By the end of this, I'm going to have a plot for a novel, and maybe I'll even write it, publish it, and you guys can check it out if you want, right? But for the demonstration purposes of this series, this is the protagonist and antagonist we came up with. A girl ghost, get it? Dead and breakfast. The protagonist lives in a bed and breakfast along with her parents. They haunt the bed and breakfast. They run it for other ghosts. The other ghosts use the building as their bed and breakfast, but it's also a bed and breakfast for the living. Okay? So they're commingling. They're living in the same building. We've got living guests and dead guests. And the dead portion is being run by this girl and her parents. Okay? Maybe this girl has a goal of helping her parents smoothly run the dead and breakfast, right? But there's a dead people government or bureaucracy that manages dead living relations, and the government agency wants to shut down the D&B for some reason, okay? So there, we've defined our protagonist, Callie. Well, I give her a name in the next step, but the girl, right? She's the protagonist. She wants to help her parents run the dead and breakfast. And then there's this government agency that wants to shut it down. So there we have the opposing high stakes goals. I talk all about this in the second video. Go check it out. Okay. Step 3 was to give our protagonist and antagonist a working name. I called our protagonist Callie, and I called the antagonist government force, the Department of Spectral Affairs. Okay. Then in step 4, we also did this in video number 3. Go check it out if you haven't already. We gave our protagonist some qualities or traits that would make her likable and easy to relate with or sympathize with, okay? If people don't care about your protagonist, guys, they are not going to read your book. So it's absolutely critical that you think through this before you get into plotting, right? What are going to be some qualities about your hero that's going to make your readers care about them? We went through a whole list and we talked about this stuff in depth. I gave a working example, and then we completed this step together. And we said, okay, in our case, we're going to make our protagonist courageous, loyal, humble, dedicated to helping her parents, and we're going to put our protagonist in danger at some point, right? So we gave them 4 or 5 qualities or features, or, I guess you say qualities, this is a person, that make them sympathetic and relatable, okay? Go back and watch that video if you need to do this and you don't know how. Then we talked about step 5, okay? Step 5, which we talked about in the previous video, was to state the conflict that results from the diametrically opposed competing desires of your protagonist and antagonist. If you can't state your conflict, you're not ready to write your premise. So that's why we do this in step 5, okay? So we talked about that in the last video. I'm not going to go through how you come up with that, but if you want help with it, go back and watch the other video. Then we completed this step and we said, Callie wants to help her parents run the dead and breakfast, and the DSA wants to shut the dead and breakfast down. So this story, that's the external conflict, but it's also about bureaucracy and oppressive government forces against human desire, right? We talked in the last video about how conflict, you're going to have an external conflict that's a specific conflict for your character, but ideally it should represent something broader that has consequences for your readers, right? To really get them engaged in the story. And that's how we did it, right? Most people can relate to oppressive government forces competing with their desires. So it's something that's going to, again, draw us into the story. Okay, now we're ready. We just did the recap. Go back and watch those videos if you want all the detail. Now we're ready to move on to step 6, which in this story development process is to define the premise of your story. Guys, this is an exciting time, so congratulations if you've been following along at home and you're ready for your premise, okay? Because when you write your premise, this is like the thing that once you have your premise, you're getting there. Like, you're dialed in. You know what your story is going to be about, right? And if you've taken the time to do it right, making sure you have high stakes goals like we talked about in the second or third video, making sure that you have antagonistic forces, making sure your hero is relatable and sympathetic, then this story it's got legs, right? This can be a good book because you're going through this process, right? So here, the premise is where we're going to define the premise. So first, let me give you a definition of what a premise is. Okay, then we're going to look at an example, and then we're going to write one together for this particular book. Okay? A premise is the basic idea or concept of a story, often described in a concise 1 or 2 sentence summary. It's the essence of the story, the core conflict, and the driving force behind the narrative. It establishes the central characters, their goal, the obstacle they face, and the world they inhabit. Okay, so if you read that carefully and if you listened along as I read it, you should know why we did the steps in the order that we did them in, right? Notice it says here that the premise includes the essence of the story, the core conflict, right? Well, in step 5, we defined our core conflict. If we didn't know our core conflict, we wouldn't be ready for writing the premise, right? You have to know this driving force behind the narrative, right? Again, we define that with the conflict, and when we talked about the opposing forces between the protagonist and the antagonist. So if you hadn't done that previously, you're not ready to write your premise, right? And it also says here that part of the premise is to establish the central characters, their goals, and the obstacles they face, right? Well, in step 2, we already defined our central characters. We have our antagonist defined. We have our protagonist defined. We've defined their goals as diametrically opposed, so we already know at least the main obstacles that they're going to face. and we're ready to write our premise. Okay. So before we take a stab at this for our working example, let's talk about Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. Most people have read this. If you haven't read this book, definitely go read it. It's one of the best books, in my opinion, of all time for fiction, right? Novels. Here's a premise of Harry Potter, right? Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. This is the first book in the series. Follows Harry Potter, a neglected orphan boy who discovers on his 11th birthday that he is a wizard. He leaves his abusive aunt and uncle who attend Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. There he makes friends, learns magic, and uncovers a mystery surrounding a dark wizard who killed his parents. Okay, so that's the premise. And if you know the characters, if you know the conflict, you can develop your premise. Okay, so now we're going to work on one for Dead and Breakfast. Okay, now I put together this little template that you can use at home if you're struggling, right? Now, if you've gone through steps 1 to 5, you should be able to pull the pieces together. It might be a little bit hard, but you can pull them together and come up with a premise. But if you're still struggling and you don't know exactly how to write it, here's a template you can use to write your premise, okay? And we're going to use this to write our premise, okay? And the template is this. When insert protagonist learns that insert antagonist wants to blank, he, she must blank, okay? So this is a very simple way to come up with your premise. And notice we already have all the ingredients here to write this because we've filled them out in the previous steps. We have our protagonist, we have our antagonist, we know what they want. So it's just a little bit of just kind of rejiggering this. So let's take a stab at this, right? I'm gonna say when Callie learns that the DSA wants to shut her parents' Dead and Breakfast down, she must stop them and restore her parents' D&B before insert, you don't have to say this part. You could just say, you must stop them, right? She must stop them. Okay, let's just stop there. I'll move on a little bit in a second. When Callie learns that the DSA wants to shut her parents' Dead and Breakfast down, she must stop them. Okay? Again, I'm going to fill in the Department of Spectral Affairs. Okay, just for a little bit more specificity there. But this is a very basic premise, but it is a premise. It tells us who the main characters are. It tells us who the antagonist and the protagonist is. It tells us what the protagonist wants, and it implies and talks about the conflict, right? And it tells us what she must do, okay? So that is going to give you your premise. Now, you can obviously fill in the details like I've done with the Harry Potter one. You can do, when Callie learns that the Department of Spectral Affairs wants to shut down her Dead and Breakfast, after her 11th birthday or whatever, you can add in more details as you get them and as you learn them, but this will give you your basic premise that you need to actually move forward with this story development process. Guys, if you're getting value out of these videos, consider subscribing, hit that alert bell, and I'll see you in the next video.